Hi, I'm Matt, welcome to Tech Tested, and today we're going to be doing the YouTube PC build where you guys pick the parts. Alright, let's get into the parts that you guys picked for this build. First off, we have the processor, the AMD Phenom 965 Black Edition. Now, this is an old processor, but it actually still performs alright. We used it in a previous PC build. I'll link that video down in the description. And it's not great for modern day gaming, but it does hold up pretty well in a lot of titles. Next up is the graphics card, and that is the AMD R9 290X. Now, you guys had a lot of options, and I'm a little surprised you guys decided to go with this, but it seems we've got a lot of AMD fans on our channel, so that was the best AMD graphics card we had available, so that's what we went with. As far as storage goes, you guys decided to go with the classic SSD hard disk drive combos. So we have a 120 gig SSD with a 1 terabyte hard drive, and that should suffice us just fine for all of our gaming needs. Next up is the cooler, and you guys decided to go with the dual tower air cooler over the Hyper 212 Evo or a 120mm AIO. Now, I just got this in from Amazon and I've never tested this CPU cooler, so this should be pretty interesting. So we're gonna give this Reven a shot. Needless to say, it's quite a beefy CPU cooler, so hopefully we can get a little bit of overclocking done on our processor. Now, as far as cases go, I'm really disappointed to tell you guys we couldn't go with your number one pick, the Cooler Master Stacker. And the reason for that is I am missing a side panel, but more importantly, I am missing the brackets that hold in the power supplies. So we're actually having to go with the Antec case. Now, that's not a bad thing. It's still a great case, but I am disappointed I wasn't able to get the exact components you guys decided to go with. Still, it's your second choice, so we'll go with that. We do have our 700 watt power supply here, and the motherboard we're going with is actually an AM3 MSI motherboard, and this is the one I was able to unlock the 6-core Athlon on. The reason I'm going with this one is because I want to save all of my really high-end motherboards for testing CPUs, and I actually intend to keep this build together for quite a while. So this motherboard will do just fine. It supports the CPU, and it has some features on it that I really like, so this is the motherboard we're going with. Last up, you guys didn't disappoint on the 5¼ inch bay expansion. You guys picked 2 disk drives and a fan controller, which is just awesome. I love populating 5¼ inch drive bays, and apparently you guys do too. So here is our fan controller. It can control up to 6 different fans at once, and we have our 2 disk drives right here. So those are the components you guys picked, and now let's get on with the build. So the system is built and we need to go over a couple things. I know you guys wanted 32 gigabytes of RAM, but the CPU cooler was blocking 2 of the RAM slots. I tried to fit 2 lower profile DIMMs in there that were each 4 gigabytes, but they were preventing me from installing Windows on the system, so those had to be removed. However, we still do have 16 gigabytes of memory, and we got really lucky because the 2 slots that are farthest away from the CPU do mean that we are still in dual channel on this particular motherboard. That's not typical of most motherboards, but on this one, it worked. So you may notice we didn't use the fan controller, and there's a couple reasons for that. The first reason is all of the fans that were pre-installed in the case are actually controlled by Molex and have individual fan controllers on each of those fans, so the fan controller wouldn't work. Second, the hardware for mounting the hard drives seemed to be absent. I didn't know that was going to be an issue, but we needed a place to mount the hard drives, so I used a hot swap bay that I had from a different build, and that's where we're storing our hard drives. Now I want to address that massive CPU cooler we have. It has its pros and its cons. Biggest con is it's so big it barely fits in the case. In fact, the way it is now, it doesn't. You can't put the side panel on because the RAM DIMMs are forcing that front CPU fan to stick out just a little too far to fit the side panel on. The second thing we need to know is it's extremely loud. We went into the BIOS and tried lowering the fan speeds, but even after doing that, it was just irritatingly loud. Now the CPU cooler does come with low speed adapters, which I highly recommend using if you end up getting this CPU cooler. However, it's near impossible to get to the headers on the motherboard for the fans, so I can't really install those after the fact. Overall though, the performance cannot be argued with. Even with our CPU at 1.5 volts, at full load we still didn't exceed something like 48 degrees Celsius, which is really impressive. The installation process was also not too painful. Just keep in mind that once it's in your case, you're not going to be able to do a whole lot of work around the CPU. And speaking of the CPU, we were able to overclock that to 3.8 gigahertz. Now, I've overclocked this CPU many times, and I know that once you exceed 3.8 gigahertz, you've got to pump stupid amounts of voltage into it. On the GPU, we were able to get the R9 290X all the way up to 1080 megahertz, and we got the memory clock up to 1400 megahertz. Now we need to get into the benchmarks, and I put all the games at 1080p at their maximum preset so we could load up that GPU as much as possible. Alright, something you guys may have noticed from the benchmarks is we never actually hit that 60 frames per second on average that we want to see in our titles. And in every single instance, despite the maximum graphics preset, we were severely CPU bottlenecked. Even in titles like Far Cry and Tomb Raider, we still saw more utilization of the CPU than we did of the GPU. That's kind of disappointing considering there's really no upgrade path for this motherboard. We would have to go with an entirely new platform in order to see a performance increase, but that R9 290X is really being held back at this point. Still, I'm a big fan of the Phenom series CPUs, and I'm really glad you guys decided to put that in the system. So what's to happen with the YouTube PC that you guys built? Unlike most of the systems I build, this one's actually gonna stay built. I may swap out the graphics card since it is being so bottlenecked by that CPU, but I'm gonna use it as a secondary PC and use that as a LAN party PC if we can ever get back to having LAN parties again. It's loud, it's heavy, the cable management is quite awful, but I really love it. It's such a fantastic example of what you guys could put together. And aside from swapping out the GPU, this thing's gonna stay pretty much exactly how it is now. If there are any other tests you guys would like to see me do with this PC, make sure to let me know down in the comments. As always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, follow us on our social media platforms, and check out our Discord and our website so you can pick yourself up some Tech Tested merch. Oh, and here are those two dudded RAM sticks.